can we have prosperity without growth? So, Bim, if I could come to you first to give us some overview around this notion of what really is prosperity and why have we been struggling to such an extent, I think, since the financial crisis, to really rediscover what that is for the good of the people.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Kamal, and thank you all for being here. The way I think about this is, I suppose, to answer the exam question at the top, is can we have prosperity without growth? I don't think we can. I think we do need economic growth, but it is a necessary but not sufficient condition for prosperity. And what I mean by prosperity is improved living standards for everybody. Living standards are not just income, it's the state of your health, it's the opportunities you have through education, the ability to enjoy leisure, the ability to raise a family, and to enjoy life as well. All of those things together, of which economics is a key part but not the only part, is how I think of prosperity. That's what I try to do representing my constituents in Parliament and indeed broadly as a Member of Parliament for the country. And I think that you need economic growth in order to achieve that. But you mentioned the financial crisis, and I think that sometimes we almost fail to come to terms with just how seismic a hit to living standards that was. And to make this point, it was a greater hit than World War I, the Great Depression, World War II. And if our economy had grown at the same rate after 2008, the 15 years or so after that period of time, to about now, as it had the 15 years before the financial crisis, our economy per head would be 22% higher. 22%. Now, that's not to say there were not weaknesses in the pre-financial crisis economy. We had regional imbalances, there were problems around infrastructure and skills and various things, and those weaknesses were there, and we needed to, and to some degree, the strong growth actually hid a lot of those weaknesses. But just to make this point, imagine if our GDP per capita were 22% higher now, a lot of the political problems that we have, that we discuss, whether it be around healthcare, climate, energy, education, whatever it is, are often downstream of the core fact that we don't have enough economic growth. Now, conservatives will typically, when we think about economic growth, we think about the private sector. Obviously, the private sector is the engine of economic growth. And when conservatives have too often talked about this recently, we've sort of gone for tax cuts, supply-side measures, let's think about more tax cuts. On the left, they have often said, well, what we need is more public spending, and through public spending we get more growth. And obviously, at different times in different areas, you obviously need a combination of supply-side measures and public spending and how the government works. But it's my view that the missing link, what makes how we need to turn higher growth into prosperity, is more effective state capacity. And I say that as a strong conservative. More effective state capacity, not only to turn the higher growth into prosperity, but indeed to help generate the higher growth. Why? Because the challenges that we face now in the mid-2020s, or coming into the mid-2020s, into the 2030s, climate, I mentioned energy and how we transition to a clean energy future, the aging society, which means that the demand on healthcare keeps rising every single year, and the constant need to improve educational standards. These challenges can only be met by more effective state capacity, mobilizing and working with private sector, society, and public sector more broadly to achieve those better outcomes. And you know, I'll stop there, but we should talk this evening not just about the private sector, but also about how a more effective, agile state in the center, working with more delivery and more spending and more responsibility at local government, both bits doing things, frankly, much more effectively, sorting out our regulatory system, getting higher quality at every level in Westminster and in Whitehall. I'm not leaving out politicians. Westminster and in Whitehall. Together, if we do that, we can generate more economic growth and turn that growth into prosperity for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Bim. Just one additional question before I come to you, Helen, on that. This notion of the more active states, or agile, I think, as you say. You have economists like Mariana Mazzucato talking about the entrepreneurial state, this idea. How widely shared is that within the Conservative Party? So 2 years ago, with William Lewis, who's the former chief executive and publisher of the Wall Street Journal, we launched our own business to try and create trusted journalism for the next generation of consumers. As an entrepreneur, I'm interested in what you think, Bim, the state should be doing to help us grow a fledgling media company here in the UK and in the US, which is what we're doing, but UK focused. How is the state supposed to help us do that, creating jobs and hopefully a new successful business?
I'll think of, I mean, there are lots of things, but let me pick out three. The first is to have a regulatory system that isn't there to deliberately stop things happening, but to help things happen. And too much of our regulatory system is messy, things take too long, and it's not about more regulations or fewer regulations, it's just ones that are effective and decisions are made on time. And whether you're, I don't know, whether you're doing something in the back of your, extending your house right the way through to getting some approval in your media business, I think that sorting out the regulatory system is one thing the state can do. It doesn't cost any money. Second thing is your members of staff, they need to be able to get in and out of work easily. Things like the transport system, making sure those are more effectively delivered. I'm not talking about the intention. I'm not arguing about where you should do one project to another project. Simply the delivery, the speed with which we do things, so slow. So again, the government being more effective can help you with that. And ultimately, I suppose the third thing is that the overarching tax environment needs to be competitive compared to other places. That does not mean that you just need to have the lowest tax rate possible, because of course you need to pay for various things that we're talking about. But unless you can be competitive in that regard, then people who have the option don't come here, and they don't create the jobs, and they don't create the opportunities. So I think it's a combination, as I've said, between more effective state, can be more active. It doesn't have to be bigger, but it has to be more effective, and the private sector having the freedom to do as much as it can in a simple way.
Thank you, Bim. Bim, can I bring you in on politicians will never be brave enough to make the leap? Right. Now, that doesn't mean that I agree with that subject, but that's what's been raised by both Helen and Kate, that we can't actually have a serious conversation about the limits of, let's call it, economic growth, because politicians in the mainstream parties will never go there. Are you constrained by what you can say because you've got to keep to the simple narrative, growth is good? Economic growth is good, because growth of all sorts is good, but economic growth.
Well, look, I don't think I feel unduly constrained, but I listen very carefully, and I've read a lot of what Kate has written, and I want to just address some of the points and see and give you my take on them in that context. I think that, and what I was at pains to do, not just here, but whenever I'm speaking, whenever I speak to constituents or in the House of Commons or whatever it is, to think about what are the outcomes for people, right? So you mentioned, we're stuck in a growth paradigm that means that, we keep repeating this sort of mantra, growth is good. But ultimately, what all politicians are in the business of is delivering better outcomes for people, not just materially, but also in education, health, all sorts of opportunities that are not just material. The problem is that we live in a world whereby unless you have enough material, free money, whether as an individual, a family, or a country, you can't deliver those practical outcomes. So when somebody says, well, this growth, it's sort of running out, and there's nothing you can do, we now need to just think about how to make do with what we have or to not grow anymore, that's very difficult if waiting lists are rising, right? That's very difficult if there are no spaces to get on the course you want, to further education or university. So I am all ears as to how we now, and you're right about living in a more mature society. I mean, obviously, we're not in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, or we're not China in 1983. Or, of course, there are periods of time when just things are going exponentially like that. You look at the whole Western economy, the difficulties that we have are mirrored by the difficulties in most European countries, most Western countries, as Helen outlined in the energy space as well. But you do need to deliver better outcomes for people all the time. And some of those things are non-material. I mentioned regulation. I mean, boring though it is, we can get a much better regulatory system without spending more money. It's just thinking about it more smartly. But some of them do require more money. Why? Because people, as human beings, we always want to get things to be better. I want my children's lives to be better than my own. And I don't mean better in them having more money than me. I mean actually have better experiences, to live longer, to have better opportunities. And so that's what we're focused on. I don't think Vanessa is stuck in this sort of paradigm that you've described. I think what we are stuck in is a paradigm of trying to make things better for everybody. And so I'm all ears as to how we can do that both financially, economically, and in other ways.